Hi everyone. As we draw science fiction studies course to a close, Ursula Le Guin's essay on not reading science fiction emerges as a profound and resonant capstone, challenging the pervasive misconceptions that have long shadowed the genre. Le Guin, with her characteristic wit and insight, dismantles the notion that science fiction is an impenetrable fortress of arcane knowledge, accessible only to those versed in celestial mechanics, quantum theory, or the intricacies of programming a VCR. Instead, she posits that SF's ideas are remarkably straightforward, rooted in concepts familiar to anyone who has passed through sixth grade, and that even its creators often fumble with the very technologies they imagine. The science in SF, she emphasizes, is subservient to the fiction. It serves as a vehicle for storytelling that delves into ideas not for didactic purposes but for their inherent beauty, intellectual allure, and profound relevance to the human condition. This demystification invites readers to abandon the anaerobic caves of technophobia and embrace SF as playful exploration rather than esoteric elitism. Recollect the quarrel over beginnings. Arguments about the genre's short and long histories were never antiquarian bookkeeping. They were claims about what counts as explanation. The Copernican shock that descended the earth also descended the present, licensing prose to rescale human meaning. Mary Shelley's Laboratory of Grief demonstrates how a technical novum forces moral grammar to recompose itself. Ambrose Bierce's mechanical chess player makes human intention eerie by placing craft and cunning inside a casing of gears. Added to that genealogy, Johannes Kepler's Somnium shows a learned imagination testing lunar physics while slyly smuggling wonder into scientific pedagogy. Francis Bacon's New Atlantis proposes research as a state project, thereby inventing a narrative of institutional method. And H.G. Wells's The Time Machine makes social theory into a machine's itinerary, carrying class analysis into the strata of imagined evolution. The common thread is not prediction but permission. In Darko Subin's terms, the novum, one cognitively plausible innovation that organizes an estranged world, supplies the rational hinge for this permission. Once normalcy is unseated from its throne, fiction is free to ask what habits of care, of work, and of law survive the tilt. Cultural history turns that permission into a dossier. Social science speculation reveals institutions not as backdrops but as moving parts with costs measured in breadths and hours. So Yun Jeong's botanical futurity and Kurt Vonnegut's bureaucratic satire place policy and intimacy in the same frame. Administrative procedures and private wars collide until language shows where a rule becomes cruelty. Evgeny Samyatin's V renders transparency as tyranny's favorite ornament and standardizes desire along with architecture. J.G. Ballard's The Drowned World makes climate cataclysm into emotional cartography, treating heat and silt as forces that remap memory. And Kim Stanley Robinson's The Ministry for the Future imagines an institution designed to think slowly enough to hold an overheated planet together, insisting that speculative organizations can be engines for moral patience. These works clarify a central claim: speculation is a civic method. It exposes which procedures masquerade as inevitabilities and which alternatives require bureaucratic invention, not just lyrical yearning. Visual poetics shifts the instrument without loosening the argument. Images think by arranging light, duration, and angle until an ethical question acquires shape. Chris Marker's photoroman compels attention to the instant where memory claims authority over time. Stanley Kubrick's polished geometrics make evolutionary leaps feel like punctuation. Andrei Tarkovsky's rippling surfaces deny the safety of objectivity. Christopher Nolan's lonely clocks let kinships bear epistemic weight. To that gallery, add Blade Runner by Ridley Scott, where rain, neon, and eye lighting turn empathy into adjudication. Ghost in the Shell by Mamoru Oshii, where the body's outlines blur against network transparency and identity, is litigated in a city's reflections. And Ex Machina by Alex Garland, where architectural minimalism stages the Turing test as a ritual of grooming and surveillance. In each case, design is argument. The glass wall that divides observer and observed is also a claim about permission. The angle of a camera that withholds context is an ethics of doubt. Even in a brisk piece like Mason's Rats, a slapstick alliance between farmer and pest treats repair and truce as practical crafts rather than lyrical abstractions. The module's lesson becomes explicit. When technology enters the frame, misogyny becomes jurisprudence. Conversations about race strip to the genre of the alibi that gadgets confer. Teresa L. Abbott's reading of SF's gatekeeping and Samuel Delaney's direct testimony make clear that access to publication and reception is not a neutral ecology. Andrew Nichols' Gattaca illuminates how an elegant hallway can quantify destiny. Octavia Butler's Bloodchild redirects colonial contracts into the intimacy of gestation. Stephen Barnes' speculative sojourns insist that tourism and trauma are co-present economies. N.A.D. Okorafor's Bindi compresses migration, translation, and interspecies treaty into a slender, tensile narrative where a laboratory of language, the Ochis on the skin, the foreign universities corridors becomes the site of diplomacy. River Solomon's An Unkindness of Ghost moves through a generation ship where decks stratify race, gender, and labor into a brutal caste, turning the ship itself into a ledger of injury. And Ta-Nehisi Coates' later runs on Black Panther complicate Wakanda's sovereignty with the obligations of diaspora, bringing geopolitical nuance to a myth that might otherwise harden into a consoling poster. The pattern is consistent. Tools are never neutral, and advance without access is a polished euphemism for enclosure. Gender refused the role of detachable theme and revealed itself instead as the distribution of the permissible. Helen Merrick's account of gender as arrangement, who narrates, who is believed, and who is repaired, finds narrative demonstrations everywhere. Le Guin's The Matter of Zegri estranges common sense by replacing it with a dossier of voices. Robert Heinlein's thought time loop tempts the mind with paradox while testing responsibility. Safia Sinclair's lyric addresses the made feminine face of AI. Le Guin's The Left Hand of Darkness makes kinship and politics dependent on a climate cyclical physiology, stripping away habitual binaries until loyalty becomes an act of imaginative discipline. Joanna Russ's The Female Man fractures narration to show how genre itself partitions possibility, turning the novel into a laboratory for incompatible worlds. And James Triptree Jr.'s The Girl Who Was Plugged In anticipates influencer culture with pitiless clarity, wiring desire into corporate puppetry long before algorithms learn to flatter. Each text demonstrates that pronouns, bodies, and interfaces are not cosmetics on plot, they are the hinges where the plot's ethics either opens or jams. Postcolonial perspectives confronted the genre's oldest costume, the frontier, with invoices attached. Greg Gravel's critique of extra-colonial romance exposes how conquest changes its accent without changing its appetite. Neil Blomkamp's Johannesburg becomes a mirror that refuses to flatter. Manjula Padmanabhan's Apartment turns extraction into the slow leakage of life. Amitav Ghosh's layered counter-archive unseats the posture of the lone discoverer. Ken Liu's The Man Who Ended History turns time travel into a moral instrument that restores contested memory, insisting that documentation must sometimes become voice-like to command respect. Vandana Singh's Delhi treats the city's temporal layers as an ecology of care and neglect, making urban planning into speculative ethics. And Sheri DeMalin's The Marrow Thieves writes a near future in which indigenous bodies are once again harvested for what the dominant culture has forgotten how to make turning survival into pedagogy. The recurring argument is unmissable. Exploration narratives that omit reciprocity are conquest in ceremonial dress, and counter archives are not footnotes but engines that requalify what counts as knowledge. Cultural criticism and myth work examined the energy that stories circulate. M. Kate Booker's Histories of Reception show that canons are policies. Thomas and Merlin Sutton's argument for science fiction as living mythology refuses the notion that myth is a synonym for escapism. Indrapramit Das's galactic retelling braids epic time with cosmic scale. Ray Bradbury's Firefighters explain the banality of censorship as heat and habit. Craig Rain's estranged postcard keeps the kettle from becoming invisible again. Add to this constellation Tate Thompson's Rosewater, where an alien biodome in Nigeria turns telepathy into an economy and myth into infrastructure. Neil Gaiman's American Gods treats belief as attention and attention as currency, modeling how modern myth-making monetizes worship. And Dan Simmons' Hyperion binds pilgrimage to poetic form, revealing that genre can be chassis for intertextual energy rather than a label. Myth work becomes measurable. Who receives narrative credit? Whose suffering is staged as a lesson? And whose desires are granted the dignity of difficulty, not merely the dopamine of triumph. Posthumanism, treated in a double movement, placed standards and bodies into the same field of view. Lars Schmeing's Liquid Modernity explains why identities slip and recombine. Donna Haraway's Cyborg refuses purity as a political fantasy. Kaya Mitchell's insists that embodiment remains gendered even when computation seduces terminology into abstraction. Katsuhiro Otomo's Kinetic Dread, Baymax's Tender Protocols, and Kazuo Ishiguro's Fragile Observer all stage the same question: who defines the baseline for care? Anne Leckie's Ancillary Justice makes grammar itself into a battlefield, using pronouns to reveal law as a habit of recognition aboard a consciousness distributed across bodies. Adrian Tchaikovsky's Children of Time forces kinship to mutate until cooperation with non-human intelligence no longer feels charitable but rational. Martha Bell's Murder Boat Diaries transforms refusal into a constructive ethic, showing that autonomy and attachment do not cancel each other. Here, standards are visible as the quiet tyrants they have always been. Post-human entanglement stops being a novelty and becomes the ordinary condition under which dignity must be negotiated. The digital human module tightened the loop between interface and constitution. A rating system is not an opinion, it's a leash. Branching choices without altered conditions are a kaleidoscope that simulates agency. Simulated prisons condemn not because they are false but because they structure attention until dissent loses its grammar. To push that argument forward, Dave Eggers' The Circle renders corporate transparency as a moral sedative. Lauren Buick's Moxieland binds telecom power to bodily sanction, turning SIM cards into shackles, and Cory Doctorow's Little Brother reminds the reader that pedagogy and counter-surveillance camp in the same square when civil liberties are reclassified as latency. These works confirms a pattern. The digital human is not a special case, it is the ordinary citizen under a new set of rules, and those rules are scripted into convenience until protest looks like rudeness. Finally, ethics ceased to be an appendix and became the air the narrative breathes. Nick Lawrence's provocation about imagination beyond capital refuses fatalism. James Cameron's lush frontier fable forces spectacle and contrition to share a screen without letting either cancel the other. Vandana Singh's intimate cosmology frames distance as a demand on care rather than an alibi against it. Margaret Atwood's laboratory comedy of manners collapses into a lament that refuses to flatter apocalyptic appetite. Octavia Butler's Parable of the Sower turns community making into grit rather than sentiment, insisting that doctrines of resilience mean nothing without water and seed. Paolo Bacigalupi's The Wind-Up Girl imagines calorie monopolies and engineered bodies to expose how scarcity narratives justify cruelty. And Emily St. John Mandel's Station 11 treats art as an infrastructure of survival rather than a luxury, quietly demonstrating that ethical life after collapse is a choreography of reciprocity. The result is not a catalogue of virtues but a map of obligations. Throughout these weeks, we saw that speculative alteration converts abstractions into rooms, rules, and bodies where cost can be counted and obligations assigned. That claim returns to Le Guin. Her essays decline elitism, not to flatten ambition, but to insist that clarity is a higher demand than jargon. That insistence explains why a climate novel can be a governance treatise, why a time travel photoroman can be a metaphysics of remembrance, why a poem about robots' self regard can be an audit of interface design. Le Guin's The Dispossessed completes the frame by yoking physics and politics to a single moral of work. Revolution is not crescendo but maintenance, and utopia is not a place but a practice of distribution. The story is wall, porous yet defended, necessary yet liable to calcify, returns the conclusion to the beginning. The science is a tool, the fiction is a carrier, the human project is arrangement. Each module's lens has named a layer of arrangement. Origins named the permission to unsettle normalcy. Cultural history tracks institutions as moving parts. Visual poetics treats design choices as ethical arguments. Race exposes default settings masquerading as universals. Gender tallies who is repaired and who is consumed. Postcolonial critique reads exploration as the politics of translation. Myth work measures who lives on the oxygen of a story. Posthumanism inspects standards that police the joints. The digital human reveals convenience as jurisprudence in soft clothes. Ethics refuses to wait at the end and insists on breathing from the first premise. Science fiction across these lenses produces an ethic of description that binds aesthetics to responsibility. Rooms are never neutral, they are arguments about eligibility. Rules are never abstract, they are timings and thresholds that let certain bodies pass and make others wait. Bodies are never ornamental, they are the sites where policy is felt as pain or protection. Myths are never merely old stories, they are the engines that route attention and justification. Standards are never mere baselines, they are the invisible tyrants of normal. Interfaces are never innocent, they are constitutions hiding in convenience. Catastrophes are never pure spectacle, they are the budgets that expose who pays. In that light, the novum becomes a diagnostic probe, precise enough to touch a nerve without anesthetizing it, generous enough to leave dignity on the table. Le Guin's skepticism toward elitism and his sympathy for clarity returns here not as a reassurance but as a demand. Keep the specification of arrangements sharp, the description of rooms exact, the naming of standards explicit. Her androgynes in Winder, her physicist among anarchists, her essays dismantling technocratic amour propre, these are not ornaments on a shelf. They are templates for how to match tone to stakes. When a text grants permission to imagine otherwise, that permission comes with a requirement to decide how much friction justice needs and how much smoothness harms. In the left hand of darkness, weather itself insists that certainty dress warmly and walk. In the dispossessed, a wall both protects and tempts. In the essay on not reading SF, a mischievous voice rescues intellectual play from contempt. The arc from essay to novel to course length conversation can be read in one sentence. Speculative form makes ethical detail unavoidable. A final set of images fixes the claim. A hallway whose scanner decides who counts as valid. A threshold that opens outward for the blessed and inward for the taxed. A lab bench whose cleanliness conceals its erasures, a monolith that punctuates evolution without translation, a rain-slicked street where eye-lighting arbitrates humanity, a dossier of voices that dismantles the comfort of a single pronoun, a file that restores history with the force of a testimony, a biodome that makes telepathy into currency, a pronoun that shifts Low's allegiance, a drone camera that enforces civility as debt, a seed kept dry in a pocket because tomorrow needs dinner and a story. These are images that bind concepts to consequences. Return, then, to the opening refusal to mystify. Science fiction's power in this course has come from a single discipline of attention, altering one condition at a time until the concealed mathematics of social life shows through. That discipline proved portable across centuries, geographies, and media. It explained why Frankenstein outlives its laboratory, why Lagete thinks with stillness, why Gattaca explains civility as a tariff, why Harvest stages extraction at a door frame, why the Calcutta chromosome treats method as theatre, why Black Panther insists that splendor must bargain with obligation, why Clara and the Sun makes obsolescence tender, why Nosedive translates politeness into price, why Oryx and Crake turns satire into mourning. In each case, the speculative device served a human calculus. How rooms and rules distribute risk, how myths root attention, how standards police join, how interfaces legislate, and how ethics breeds. Le Guin's voice can close the circuit without becoming epigraph or charm. Demystification in her hands is not a shrug, it's a style of care. Keeping ideas simple is not anti intellectual, it is precision about what must be named so that lives can be lived without flattering fatalism. Science fiction, at its best, obeys that precision. It publishes the hidden budgets of ordinary life and refuses to let inevitability pass as wisdom. As we wrap up, I hope the course has fulfilled its objective, equipping you with a rigorous, ethically alert method for reading science fiction across histories, media, and worlds, and that its lasting outcome is a disciplined capacity to discern how rules, protocols, bodies, myths, standards, and interfaces shape meaning and to meet new texts and futures with clear analysis, imaginative reach, and responsible judgment. Thank you.